In the summer of 2013, a middle-aged man named Frank pulled into a tiny town in Nevada called Kingston. Kingston, which is home to less than 100 people year-round, is so small and desolate and cut off from the rest of the state and really the rest of the country that they do not even have stoplights. It is basically just a collection of a handful of buildings like a laundromat and a saloon that are surrounded on one side by this huge mountain range and on the other just open desert. At the time, there were really only two reasons you would find yourself in Kingston, Nevada. One, if you lived there or were visiting someone that lived there, or two, if you were going to visit the abandoned mines up in the mountain that are right near Kingston. Frank was in Kingston for the latter. For the last 5 years, Frank had been traveling all over Nevada and California and just the West Coast in general, exploring abandoned mines. And he would film himself while he was in there. And then when he got back to his house, he would upload the footage to his YouTube channel. When he arrived in Kingston, Frank had already uploaded 302 videos to his channel. But despite the very high number of videos on his channel was still very, very small, and it was not growing really at all. So for him to be dedicating that much time and energy into making these videos indicated that he was not really doing it for YouTube fame. He was doing it because he had a passion for exploring these mines, and he wanted to share it with the few people that subscribed to his channel. And when you look through the first 302 videos on his channel, that passion of his really comes through. He always knows the history of the mine he is about to go into, and when he goes inside, if he finds machinery or pieces of equipment that have been left behind, he immediately knows what they are. And he speaks about them with relative sophistication. He has this lingo that sounds like he understands mines on a really granular level. So when Frank arrived in Kingston in 2013, as far as we know, the only reason he was there was just to do what he always did, which is go explore a couple of cool mines, film it, and then put it on his channel. Except this time, Frank's adventure into these mines right outside of Kingston would be cut short by something he just could not explain. However, he captured it on film, and it is absolutely bizarre. The two mines that Frank was intending to visit were the Victorine Mine and the Horton Mine. The Horton Mine was constructed first in the late 1970s or early 1980s. And when they built it, they expected it to be a gold mine, but there was no gold inside. So they constructed another mine about 900 feet above, where the entrance to the Horton Mine was. They built this other mine, and inside of that mine there was gold. This second mine they built was called the Victorine Mine. When they built the Victorine Mine, they bored this massive hole right outside the entrance to the Victorine Mine that went straight down 900 feet directly into the mountain. And this big hole they drilled went right into the Horton Mine. This was on purpose. They were basically building the equivalent of a laundry chute, except instead of tossing laundry down it, they would toss the ore they drilled from inside the Victorine Mine. They would drop it down the chute, it would fall 900 feet all the way to the Horton Mine, and that would save them from needing to carry all of this ore all the way down the mountain. Basically, it was a shortcut for the ore. And in the Horton Mine, they built this huge conveyor belt system so that anything that came off of the chute would land at the beginning of this conveyor belt, and it would get brought all the way outside of the mine where workers could process it and bring it to town. Finally, in 1989, the Victorine Mine ran out of gold. So they permanently shut down that mine as well as the Horton Mine. These two mines were located about 4 miles to the west of Kingston's town center, and so when Frank pulled into town, he moved to the western side of town and then found the access road that would bring him out to these mines. And so he just drove on this road that basically shot straight towards this huge mountain range. And after traveling about 4 miles, he reached this very sharp right turn that basically went straight up a mountain. And at this point, there is no more pavement on the road. It is a very narrow trail. It is hard to see. And so Frank would have parked his car, grabbed his camera and his equipment, and begun walking up this mountain. After quite a while, Frank would have passed a couple of rundown old cabins that were kind of overgrown. These cabins were used when these mines were in operation. They helped service the workers while they were out there, but since the mines were abandoned, so too were the cabins. And so when Frank got to these cabins, that would have meant he was very close to the entrance to both of these mines. Frank first went to the Victorine Mine, which would have been very easy to spot, because right outside of its small entrance was this huge piece of what looked like scaffolding, and that was actually the opening to this huge chute that shot down 900 feet to the Horton Mine below. So Frank goes to the Victorine Mine and he has a look around, but either Frank did not film his time inside of the Victorine Mine or he just did not upload it because there is no video of him actually going into the Victorine Mine. But his camera is turned on this particular day when he has left the Victorine Mine and he has walked all the way down to the entrance of the Horton Mine. And so we see this video, it opens up with the camera pointing at the entrance to the Horton Mine. And the entrance to the Horton Mine is very bizarre looking. The entrance, which is 20 feet tall, has all these long strips of metal plating that have been kind of anchored up all around the entrance to prevent the entrance from caving in on itself. But despite whatever functional value these copper plates might have had, the aesthetic result is very creepy and makes you not want to go in the entrance. Also, because this mine had been shut down, there is a big gate right in front of this already very foreboding entrance that warns people to not go inside. But Frank seems totally unaffected by this and just strolls right up to the entrance of Horton Mine, and he kind of talks about its history, and then he calmly steps over this warning gate telling people to stay back, and he begins walking into this mine. Right away, Frank notices there is quite a bit of water on the ground, and that is cause for concern. He tells his camera that he can go in here and just take a quick look, but he does not think he is going to explore this particular mine because there is a little bit too much water in here. He says he knows this mine is really old, but he just does not think it is wise to go in here when there is water, and that he tries to avoid this if he can. Frank is not concerned simply that there is water. It is that the water might be stagnant water. In these abandoned mines, there can be poisonous gases that accumulate, and when there is stagnant water, those gases get absorbed into the stagnant water. And so if Frank were to step into one of those puddles of water, he would release those gases from the water, the so-called bad air, and that can actually be deadly. But as Frank is standing there wondering if he should proceed, he looks down off to the left side, right inside the entranceway, and he notices there are some footprints. So somebody must have come in here recently. And so Frank decides, you know what? I will go a little bit further in. I will just be really careful of the water. Frank makes it about 10 feet inside of the entranceway when he lifts his camera up and he looks straight down into the mine, and you get your first look at really what the inside of this mine looks like. And right away you notice there is this yellow kind of collapsed looking tubing that is hanging down from the ceiling, and that is the old air filtration system. And then when Frank moves maybe another 5 or 10 feet farther into the mine, you see in addition to this air filtration system, there are also all these metal chains that are just kind of dangling from the ceiling, and they are all over the place. And both the tubing and the chains seem to extend all the way into the tunnel out of view. Those chains were previously used to hold up the conveyor belt that stretched the entire distance of this mine, which is 600 feet long. They held that conveyor belt up, which carried all of the ore from the chute out of the mine. Even though Frank has seen similar setups in other mines he has been into, he would say on camera that there is just something really off about this mine, that it was really sketching him out, and he was not really sure if he should keep going. He tells his viewers that this looks pretty sketchy and that he will go a few feet further in and check it out, but he thinks he is going to pass on this one. He would later reflect on that feeling he had inside of the mine, and he would say, you know, it felt like there was somebody else in that mine watching him. It was just very, very uncomfortable. And so, as Frank is debating whether or not he should continue just based on this kind of bad vibe he was getting, he looks down and notices there is actually running water. Now, before at the entrance it was stagnant, but now he can see the water inside of this mine. It is not stagnant, it is running. And so the risk of breathing in any bad air is pretty much gone, meaning this mine is relatively safe. But despite this supposedly positive development for someone who wanted to explore a mine, Frank is still not sure if he should continue. He points out to the camera that this is one of the creepiest mine tunnels he has ever been in, just because of how dilapidated it is and all these chains hanging down from the overhead. And he shows a shot looking down the tunnel, even further of it. But despite his apprehension, Frank ultimately decides, you know what, he had come this far. He would just go a little bit farther. And so Frank makes it to about 100 feet into this mine when he turns around and he films the opening, the entrance to the mine, which is all lit up with sunlight, and he films it kind of to give the audience a sense of just how far he had come into the mine. And so then after filming the entrance, he turns the camera and he films back down towards the back of the mine, towards the actual end of the mine. Now, at first, you do not see anything unusual. You just see the chains, and it looks kind of like it had for the first couple of minutes of this video. But then Frank pulls his flashlight out and he shines it down the hall. He looks down the tunnel, and then he says that he does not know why that one chain is swinging back there. As we saw, Frank's initial reaction to this swinging chain is speechlessness, and then just sort of this weird statement of fact that he does not know how that chain is swinging. And then after staring at this chain and even zooming in on it, trying to kind of figure out what he is looking at, Frank eventually would just turn off his camera, turn around, and leave very quickly. And when he got back to his house, he uploaded this video to his channel with virtually no context. He just said, you know, this is what I saw inside of the Horton mine. And at first, nothing happened. It did not go viral. It was not like everybody went crazy when they saw this footage. Instead, his audience saw this video and did not really know what to make of it. And then very quickly, his audience and Frank just kind of forgot about it. And Frank got back into making his kind of traditional videos. Then about a year later, the YouTube algorithm kind of noticed this Horton mine footage that he had uploaded back in 2013, and it went crazy viral. And And immediately this video was put under the microscope by YouTube personalities and by television personalities. I mean, everybody was just kind of taken aback by this footage, and what was determined fairly early on was the actual video itself was authentic. Frank really did film a swinging chain in the Horton mine in Nevada. The question became, who swung the chain? There are many people that believe Frank swung the chain, and this is all just one big hoax, and they point to some of his newer videos after this video went viral, where it appears that Frank is kind of actively going out to find paranormal activity versus just going out and exploring mines. And so they point to that and say, look, he is looking for this stuff. This cannot be authentic. This video has to be fake. But others say, look, Frank is just a guy who likes going into mines and he films the inside of these mines. He has been doing it for years and years, and he just happened to be in one when something unexplainable happened and he happened to catch it on film. And the only reason he began kind of actively looking for paranormal activity after it went viral is because kind of overnight his channel exploded. And he suddenly had hundreds of thousands of subscribers that all came from that swinging chain video. And they all wanted the same thing, more swinging chain videos, more paranormal content. And so seeing a great opportunity, Frank went out and began looking for paranormal content. That is why most of his videos after that video where the swinging chain happened are kind of geared towards fishing for that kind of stuff. But that first video, that swinging chain video, there was not really a good incentive for Frank to fake it at the time he uploaded it. Obviously now you can say, oh, well, you know, he staged it because he wanted it to go viral and he wanted to become famous and then have this great YouTube career. But how could Frank have possibly predicted that that video would go viral? Going viral is so hard and it happens so rarely and it is nearly impossible to predict. And so, how could Frank, who had uploaded hundreds and hundreds of videos before, and none of them had come anywhere near virality, how could he have said, this is going to go viral? It is just such a long shot. It also seems very uncharacteristic for Frank to have been diligently uploading on this YouTube channel, which was basically a passion project for 5 years. He has uploaded 302 videos and all of them are the same. He is posting the same type of content very consistently for the same small loyal following. And then out of left field, he uploads his ghost video with no context. Even if he was trying to go viral with this video, he would have known that the most likely outcome would be that the video did not go viral, and instead his small loyal following that was used to a particular type of content would see this video and be like, why did he upload that? Or worse, they would think, is he faking this? Is this a hoax? And if so, that would totally tarnish his reputation and he would lose probably some of his precious few subscribers. I mean, it just did not feel like the juice was worth the squeeze. But regardless, even though lots and lots of people have said, you are lying, Frank, he has maintained that he is not lying. He was in the Horton mine, he filmed what he filmed, and it remains a mystery to this day. In 2004, 16-year-old Misty Tasker was a typical American teenager living in Live Oak, Florida, which is a small rural town right in the middle of the state. One Saturday evening in January, she and her mother attended a church service. Afterwards, they hopped in her mother's truck and they got on the country highway and began making their way home. Their house was just 20 minutes down this highway. It was a straight shot, and this highway was pretty desolate. There were no streetlights. It was actually a dirt road despite being a highway. And it was just thick forest on both sides of the road the entire way. There were no buildings or houses between the church and their neighborhood. Misty's mother was already a very anxious driver who would keep both hands on the wheel. She would sit up and kind of hunch over the wheel and keep her eyes intently focused on the road. But at night, her driving anxiety would shoot through the roof because she had really bad eyesight. And so she would go to great lengths to not drive at night to avoid that high level of anxiety. But the church service they had just come from had run a little bit long. And so now Misty's mother is driving with the sun starting to set, and she is going as fast as she can to try to get home before it gets too dark. And so as they are bombing down this road at about 55 miles an hour, despite it being about a 40-mile-per-hour zone, Misty, who is in the passenger seat, just happens to look over at her mother for no particular reason. And as she is looking at her, she notices out her mother's window. It looks like there is a little girl sitting on the side of the road. She wonders what a child is doing out here in the middle of nowhere. She says to her mom, I think I just saw a little girl. And Misty's mother, who is high up on the wheel, she did not hear Misty the first time. She is just focused on driving and trying to get home. And so Misty says again, I think I just saw a little girl. We need to go back. I do not know what she is doing, but I feel like we need to go back and make sure she is okay. And so Misty's mom looks over at her and she is not prepared to turn the car around. That means staying out later, and it means she is going to be driving in even darker conditions. And so she is like, did you really see someone? Because we have to get home. And Misty's like, Mom, I am pretty sure I saw a little girl. We have to go back. And so finally, Misty's mother, she is very annoyed, but she stops the car. She does a 3-point turn and she begins driving back up the road where they came from towards this girl. Now, they had only made it about a half mile from where Misty believed she had seen this girl. And so pretty quickly they slowed down because Misty said, "I think she is in this area." And they both began scanning the right side of the road because that is where she is going to be now that they had turned around. Now, it was starting to get very dark outside, but there was enough light and they had headlights, so they were pretty confident they would be able to spot this girl. And so as they are slow rolling down the road, they both see this girl a little ways up on the right-hand side. Her back was to the road. She had her knees tucked up to her chest and she was rocking back and forth. Misty's mother made a comment that it was a little bit surprising that this girl was out here. I mean, there is really nothing around here. There are no houses, there are no buildings. There are no trails to be walking in this forest on either side. It was just kind of thick forest. And so she just thought it was very strange that this girl would even be out here, especially because there is not any traffic on this road. And so Misty's mother began slowly rolling up to her, and she told her daughter that instead of just stopping right away, let us just drive past her and get a look at her, and then we will turn around and see if she needs any help. And so as they got right up next to her, they realized she was not a little girl. She was a young teenager, but she was not a young child. And as they drove right past her, they would expect her to turn around and acknowledge the car creeping up on her. Considering there is no other traffic in the area and you are just some person sitting on the side of the road, you should definitely turn around and see what is behind you. But the girl did not acknowledge them. She just continued to have her knees up to her chest and rocked back and forth. And so Misty and her mother are a little bit freaked out by this, but they drive past her about 50 meters. Misty's mother does a 3-point turn, and when they are looking back down the road where the girl should now be on their left-hand side, they are oriented back towards their house now. She was not there anymore. But there were no streetlights. It was now almost completely pitch dark outside, and so all they had was the headlights. And so Misty told her mom, drive up a little ways, maybe the girl stood up and moved, and we just cannot see her because she is not in the headlights. And so Misty's mom began driving down the road and kind of turning slightly towards the left to shine the light more to the left. But there was no sign of this girl. For good measure, they turned right slightly to shine the lights more to the right-hand side of the road. But there was no sign of this girl. And so Misty and her mother just slow rolled back down the road, kind of keeping their eye out on both sides. But after traveling for several minutes, going about 5 to 10 miles an hour and seeing no sign of this girl, they decided that, well, she must have just gone back into the woods and gone back to wherever it was she came from. And so Misty's mom began picking up speed, and before long they had gone maybe 2 or 3 miles away from where they had seen this girl, and they were coming up to this 4-way intersection with stop signs all around. And as they were getting close, Misty's mother gasped because on the other side of the intersection on the right-hand side was this girl sitting on the side of the road. She has got her back to the road, her knees are up, and she is rocking back and forth. And so Misty's mother pulls up to the stop sign and then just sits there. And both women are just stunned at what they are looking at. They had just seen her 2 or 3 miles back down the road. It was not possible for her to get all the way up here. And so Misty's mother looks at her daughter and says, do you think it is a different girl? And Misty is like, no, that is the same girl. And so they just sat there for a minute until Misty started to panic. And she said to her mom, "Mom, do not stop. I have got a bad feeling about this girl. I do not know what is going on, but you cannot stop next to this girl." But Misty's mom, she was definitely weirded out by this situation. No doubt. But she did not feel good about abandoning this girl in the middle of the night on the side of the highway. And so even though she felt a little bit hesitant herself, she told Misty, we have to at least drive past her and ask if she is okay. That is the least we can do. And Misty was not having it. She said, "Mom, do not stop. I have got a bad feeling about this. Do not stop near this girl." But Misty's mom let up off the brake and began slow rolling past this intersection. And now at this point, Misty is just absolutely terrified. And so she takes her seatbelt off and she goes down into the footwell right in front of her seat. And she closes her eyes and covers her ears and she just continues to beg her mother to just please keep going, do not stop. But her mother just continues on until she stops right next to this girl who is still just sitting on the side of the road with her back to the road. She has got her knees up, she is rocking back and forth, she is not acknowledging Misty or her mother, and so Misty's mother turns to her daughter and says, "Please roll down your window." And Misty refuses. She is still down in the footwell, still in the fetal position, she is crying and she is still begging her mother to please just go home. And so Misty's mother, frustrated, reaches across the passenger seat and grabs the knob to roll down the window manually. So she rolls the window down, and Misty, who is down in the footwell, all she remembers is sitting there covering up her ears, and she is crying, and she opens her eyes, and she is looking up towards her mom, who is reaching over the seat, and her mom yells out to this girl, and Misty remembers looking at her mom, who suddenly recoils in horror and screams, and then they take off like crazy flying down the road. Misty jumps out of the footwell, and she is looking at her mom, and she is like, "What is happening? What just happened? What did you see?" And her mom has got her hand over her mouth and she is speeding down the road and she is crying now and she is looking at Misty and she just does not have the words to describe what she just saw. And so Misty is asking her mom, "What did you see? What happened?" And finally, her mother just said, "She did not have a face. She did not have a face. It was hollow. There was nothing on her face when she looked at me." And so Misty screams and she is crying and her mom is crying and they speed home. They are home just a couple of minutes later and they run inside, practically falling over each other to get in the house. And as soon as they get inside, Misty's mom calls 911, and she did not even know how to describe what she just saw. But she knew it was too embarrassing to try to describe it as some girl without a face sitting by the highway. And so she just told the police that they had seen a girl they think needs help. And so the police, they went out and they searched that entire stretch of highway. They looked for any sign of anybody out there, but there was not. There was never any trace of that girl. On April 27, 1997, a farmer in Indonesia was walking his livestock through a thick sugarcane field near his house when he tripped on something. After he regained his balance and looked down, he noticed a strange mound of dirt that seemed totally out of place. He wanted to dig it up just out of curiosity, but he was not on his property. So, instead, he walked back to the village and he told the village leader about this strange pile of dirt and suggested he see what is under it. So the village leader and some other men headed back out to the field. They find this dirt pile, and the first thing they do is they poke it with a stick. The stick went right into the pile. It was a soft pile of dirt, and when they pulled it out, this horrible stench filled the air that was coming out of this mound. Worried about what they might find underneath this pile, the men decide to leave it alone and go back to the village and tell authorities about it. And the authorities promptly tell them to go back out there and uncover this thing and tell them what they find. And so the village leader and some more men head back out to the field and they start digging. And pretty quickly, their shovel strikes something that is fairly soft inside of this mound. And so after delicately removing some more dirt, they discover a woman's face is looking right back at them. It appeared she had been buried up to her neck, and then someone had just thrown dirt on top of her head. At this point, the authorities did come out and they were able to identify the body as belonging to a 21-year-old local woman named Dwi. After asking around the village about this girl, the police determined the last time anyone had seen her was 3 days earlier when she had left her house to run an errand. But after that, no one knew what happened to her. Just a few hours after Dwi's discovery, a 15-year-old rickshaw driver came to the police with additional information. He said 3 days earlier, on the evening of April 24th, so the same day that people had seen Dwi last, he said she had come to him to ask for a ride, and when she got into the rickshaw, he asked where she wanted to go. And she said she did not want to tell him specifically where she was going. Instead, she just wanted him to drive in a particular direction, and she would give him more information about how to get where she wanted to go as they got closer. And so this really intrigued the driver. And so after he began going in this direction, he turned to her again and said, "Can you tell me anything more about where we are going? This is really weird that you are not giving me any more information." And so finally, Dwi relented and she told him she was going to see the shaman. A shaman, in simple terms, is someone who uses magic to cure the sick. The driver did think it was odd that this girl was going to see the shaman in the middle of the night, and she was being so secretive about it. But after he dropped her off, he had not given it much thought until he found out she had died. The police approached the shaman, who was 45-year-old Ahmad Siraji, and they asked him if he had been with Dwi on the night of April 24th. Initially, Siraji said no, he had not been with her, and he had no idea what happened to her. But after police searched his house and found Dwi's belongings inside, Siraji said, "Okay, I have been lying and I have a confession to make." And he would very nonchalantly tell police that not only had he killed Dwi, he had also killed dozens of other women the same way and buried them in the sugarcane field. And so the police went out to the field and started looking around, and they found all these mounds of dirt all over the place, and under them were women buried up to their neck. After the excavation was all done, the police believed they found the bodies of 42 different women. But truthfully, that was just a guess. They believed there could be more. During his trial, Siraji explained in detail why he did the things he did. He said back in 1986, so 11 years earlier, he had this vivid dream where his deceased father came to him and instructed him to drink the saliva of 70 women, and if he did that, he would become immortal. When Siraji woke up, he did not chalk up this experience as just a strange dream. He believed he had just had a real interaction with the spirit of his dead father, and so he decided he would do as he was told. But his father did not explain to him how he was going to extract the saliva from these 70 women. And so after thinking about it for a couple of days, Siraji decided the most efficient way to do it would be to just kill the women and then forcibly take their saliva. To find his victims, Siraji began telling people in his village that he had supernatural powers, that he was able to grant women specifically everlasting beauty and riches. And many people believed it. And so as this rumor spread not only around his village but to surrounding areas, lots of women heard about it and came to him and requested his services. He would tell them to come back later that night when it was totally dark and to not tell anyone where they were going. Once they arrived, they would come inside of Suraji's house and they would pay him a fee that was roughly equivalent to $300. And then he would tell them he needed to perform a ritual to give them their beauty and their riches. And so they would leave his house, they would cut through a cemetery, and they would enter into that sugarcane field, and they would walk for a while until Suraji stopped them and he would hand the woman a shovel, and he would tell her to dig a hole in the ground, and he would assure her this is part of the ritual. And so he would stand there as she dug the hole until it was about waist deep, and then he would tell her to get in the hole and put her hands by her side. If she was at all nervous, he would just reassure her again that this is all part of the ritual, that lots of people have done this before, and that it is totally safe. And so she would get in the hole, she would put her hands by her side, Suraji would take the shovel, and he would fill the hole back in until she was completely immobilized. And then at this point, Suraji would pull out a cable, he would wrap it around their neck, and he would strangle them to death. And then once they were dead, he would pull their body out of the hole. And then he would forcibly extract their saliva. And then after that, he would take the shovel again and dig the hole a little bit deeper. And then he would put the body back inside the hole, making sure their head was still sticking out of the ground. And he would orient them so their face was looking towards his house because he believed having these women constantly looking at him at all hours of the day gave him more power. He said as for Dwi, when she first came to his house and she had paid that fee, she was worried about leaving and going and doing this ritual. It scared her. And so Suraji told her to wait, and he went into the other room where his wife was. And he told her that he was going to go kill this girl and he needed her help. He wanted her to calm the girl down, and his wife, who claimed she had no idea her husband was a mass murderer, just immediately went along with it. She came back into the room and she assured Dwi that everything was totally fine. They had done this before, it was all going to be perfectly safe. And she even said she would come with them to do this ritual. And so at this, Dwi was much more calm and she agreed to go. And so the trio left the house. They went through the cemetery out to the field, and then only 2 people came back. Suraji was executed in 2008 by firing squad, and his wife was sentenced to life in prison. In the far northwestern section of Canada is the aptly named Northwest Territories. It is a massive swath of land that virtually nobody lives inside of. To make that point crystal clear, consider the following. The country of Germany has a population of 83 million people, give or take. The Northwest Territories is 4 times as large as Germany, but only has a population of about 50,000 people. In addition to being this huge and mostly unoccupied space, the Northwest Territories are almost completely wild. Think dense forests, huge mountains, massive rivers and lakes, and lots of really big animals. Even for highly experienced outdoorsmen and women, the Northwest Territories can be a truly hazardous place. And within this truly hazardous place, there is one part that is the most hazardous, and it is right in the middle of the Northwest Territories. And it is this 11,000 square mile stretch of just pure wilderness that is called the Nahanni Valley. In 1976, the Nahanni Valley was made into a national park. But do not let that fool you. This is not some family park that anybody can go to. There are no tourist accommodations, so there are no hotels, there is really nothing inside of it. And there are no roads that lead into this park. The only way you can get inside this valley is by plane or by boat or by a very stressful and difficult overland hike. But for those who are able and willing to make the effort to get inside of this valley, you have the opportunity to explore one of the most beautiful places on the planet because this section of the world is almost completely untouched by man. It is really nature at its purest form. However, there is a catch. This valley is said to be haunted. Over the last 10,000 years, the handful of native tribes that have attempted to settle inside of the Nahanni Valley have all either suddenly disappeared without a trace, like the Naha tribe that literally overnight just was gone, leaving behind their shelters, their food, their supplies, just gone. No one knows what happened to them. Or the tribes have abruptly fled, claiming they were being terrorized or stalked by creatures lurking in the forest, like these white demons and these large wolves they called wahilas. Now, of course, this just sounds like folklore. And it might very well be that that is all it is, folklore. But starting in the early 1900s, some very strange things started happening in the Nahanni Valley that were not folklore. These things happened and they were real documented events, and they might, depending on your viewpoint, give credit to some of the theories that the native tribes people have about this valley, which is there is something evil lurking out in this forest, but we just do not know what it is. In 1904, brothers Willie, Frank, and Charlie McLeod, who all lived in the Northwest Territories, decided they wanted to go looking for gold in the Nahanni Valley. They figured because so few people had ever been inside of this valley that if there was gold to be found, then certainly it had not been found yet. And so after a very long and arduous journey using sled dogs and trains and homemade boats, they finally slipped into the valley and found themselves on what is called the Flat River, which runs right through the center of the Nahanni Valley. Now, the Flat River is kind of ironically named because it is anything but flat. It is actually more like a rapid at certain points. But either way, the three brothers, they are on their boat. They are making their way up the Flat River, and at some point, they pull off onto the riverbank and they set up camp. And then once their camp is set up, they go down to the river and they put their gold sluices in the water. A gold sluice is this long, skinny box that is usually made of wood and it has a strainer on one side. And gold miners will put it in the water submerged, and they will kind of shovel the sediment on the bottom of the water into this little funnel, and the big stuff will get stopped by the strainer and the dirt, and the water will just kind of flow out the side. And so the idea is you can trap gold nuggets inside of this sluice. And so the three brothers, they get their sluices up and they start looking for gold, and right away they hit pay dirt. There is tons of gold in this river, and so all day, all night, they get all this gold. The next morning, they do the same thing. And by the time all their containers are literally filled to the brim with gold, they decide, hey, let us go back and turn this in, get some money for it, and then come back out here. And so they pack up their tent, they pack up all their supplies, and they put everything back in their boat. They get out onto Flat River. And at some point, very early on in their journey back, the boat capsizes, and the boat actually breaks apart from the strength of the rapids of Flat River. And so the boat actually just sinks, and much of their supplies sink, including all of their gold. But the three brothers are able to grab some of their supplies, like their rifle and some lumber and some of their mining supplies, and they swim it all to shore. They catch their breath. They are totally devastated at the loss of the gold, but they are alive. They have enough supplies to survive. And so they figure all they can do is maybe try to go back to their original site, try to get some more gold because they did still have a sluice, and then try to get out of there and then regroup and come back another time. And so, using some of the lumber they recovered from their broken boat, and then also by cutting down some trees, they literally fashioned another boat and then hopped back on the Flat River, and they went back up to that site where they had found gold earlier. They set up their sluice. They set up their camp again, and this time they did not find any gold. So, all day, this very disappointing day that they have already lost all their gold, now they are not finding any more gold. And so that night when they went to bed, they decided that the next day they were just going to leave. And so the next day they get up, they pack up, they hop back on the Flat River on this new boat they built, and they are able to make their way out of the valley and get back to their homes. As soon as they get back home, the two younger brothers, Willie and Frank, start talking about how they want to go back into Nahanni Valley and go get more gold because now they know there is gold out there. It is not a question. Yes, they did not find it that second time, but they know it is out there. Charlie, the older brother, he wanted to get the gold, but he felt like, hey, that was a close call with the boat flipping over. He was not sure if it was a good idea, so he decided he was actually not going to go. He told them they could go, but he was going to stay. And so, several months go by, and Frank and Willie have been doing all this preparation for this additional trip into the valley. And finally, in 1905, they are ready. And so, Willie, Frank, and a third man called Robert Weir, who was a friend of theirs, went into the valley. Robert was going to replace Charlie. The three of them make their way up into the valley. Now, they did not tell anyone how long they were going to be gone for. And so, when they did not send any word and no one had heard from them in weeks, Charlie was actually not that concerned because he knew there was lots of gold to be had out in the Nahanni Valley. And so, he figured they must have struck it rich, and now they have decided to live out there long term, or at least maybe through the summer or maybe the next year. And so, he was not concerned. And because he was not concerned, nobody else was concerned about these three men. And so weeks turned into months, which turned into a year. And still, no one has heard from these three men. No one has heard from Willie, Frank, or from Robert. But still, Charlie maintains that nothing can be wrong because there are three of them out there. They are incredibly experienced. There is a ton of gold out there. He tells people he is sure they are just killing it, and they are just acquiring all this gold, and they will see them in the next couple of months maybe, and everything is going to be just fine. But a whole other year would go by, so they have been out there for 2 years and no one has heard from them. And at this point, Charlie thinks to himself, okay, I have to go out and see if they are okay. And so he rounds up 4 other people from his town and he mounts an expedition to head back into the Nahanni Valley to go find his 2 brothers and find Robert Weir. Charlie and his search party eventually, after yet another long and arduous journey, get into Nahanni Valley and they get onto the Flat River. And so they start making their way upstream along Flat River. So it must have been a very treacherous journey getting through the rapids of this river, and the whole time they are scanning the left and the right side, hoping to see some sign of life. They are looking for any indication that these 3 men are out here and just fine. But they did not see any sign of them, and so they finally made their way all the way up to the very end of Flat River, or I should say the very beginning of Flat River, where it breaks off from a much larger river called the South Nahanni River. And once they turned onto the South Nahanni River, they began going downstream. And again, they are looking on either side for any sign of these three men. There is no sign of them. And then the river they are on takes a very sharp turn. It is actually called the Big Bend, and it is about a 45-degree turn. And as soon as you make that turn, it dumps you into this 10-mile stretch of river called Second Canyon. Along South Nahanni River, which is about 350 miles long, there are these 4 canyons that the water passes through, and they are labeled Fourth Canyon, Third Canyon, Second Canyon, and First Canyon. And these canyons are massive. These sheer cliffs on either side of the river shoot up to 3,000 feet above the water. And in some parts, the water is actually just as deep, thousands of feet deep. And Second Canyon is unique because the cliff faces are as sheer as you are going to get. And the cliff faces almost butt up exactly against the water. So there is really very little shoreline on either side. So once you are in this 10-mile stretch, you're basically boxed in. You have thousands of feet of water below you. You have these massive cliffs on either side, and there is really nowhere to go. You need to get through this section of the river before you can effectively get onto the shoreline and take a break from being in your boat. And along these cliffs are these openings you see high up all over the cliffs on both sides that are openings to these massive cave systems inside of these thousands of feet tall cliffs. And because of how difficult it is to not only get to Nahanni Valley, but also to get up to these different cave openings, nobody has gone inside of them. We do not know what is inside of these caves, save for the few that are down low enough that people can explore. So as you are passing through Second Canyon, it is almost like you are being watched because there are all these openings, but you cannot see into them, and you are just forced to go down this 10-mile stretch, and you cannot really go anywhere. And whatever is watching you, it is watching you. As soon as Charlie and his search party entered into Second Canyon, it would have immediately gotten darker because that is another part of being in Second Canyon. These huge cliff walls of this canyon obscure the sunlight, and so they would have entered into this canyon. It would have gotten darker, and it is very windy inside of Second Canyon. So the winds would have picked up. It was dark, a very strange setting for them to be in. And they would have been looking on either side at these little strips of shoreline on either side, barely big enough for a boat to be. They would have been looking for any sign of life, but they did not see anything. As they are making their way down this 10-mile stretch, as they are getting closer and closer to actually entering into First Canyon, which is the next canyon you would enter into, the sides of the river start to get slightly larger where you could actually beach a boat, and there are some trees. And on the left-hand side, right before exiting Second Canyon, they notice there is actually a tent perched within some trees. And so, the search party naturally goes right over to the shoreline. They hop out, but as soon as they step foot on land and they have a clearer view of this tent and what is outside of it, they notice there is a body clearly lying on the ground outside of the tent. And so Charlie and the search party, they run over, and as soon as they are up close, they can tell this body is missing its head. And they see the clothes on this body are totally charred and burned. And whoever this was, they were reaching with their right arm when they died. And right outside of the reach of their right arm was a rifle that was propped up against a tree. And so they walk around this one body and they go around towards the backside of the tent where the opening to this tent is. And they find another body, another very badly decomposed body. And it is positioned kind of halfway in the tent and halfway out of the tent. And there is a blanket kind of partially obscuring this person's body. And when they move the blanket, they see this body too is missing its head. So Charlie and the search party, they continue to search around the camp in hopes of finding the heads of these two people to try to figure out who they are, but they never find the heads. However, they do find some personal effects, both in the pockets of these two bodies, and then also inside the tent that would confirm these are Charlie's brothers. As for the third man that had been with them, Robert Weir, he was not at the campsite, and in fact, he would never actually be found officially. However, a little ways down the river, another partial skeleton would be found several months later that was attributed to Robert. However, that was not 100% confirmed to be Robert. The only other interesting thing that was found at this campsite was a carving in a nearby tree, and it just said, "We have found a fine prospect," indicating that Charlie's brothers had found gold. But there was no gold either on them or in their camp or in the river nearby. Nothing. There was no gold. Charlie and his search party would leave the valley and get in touch with the mounted police who would come out to the site where the brothers had been found. They would launch an investigation, and ultimately they would come to the conclusion that all three of these men, the two brothers and Robert, had starved to death. And then after they had perished, animals had taken them off, which is why Robert was found so far away and why the skulls were missing from the two brothers. Now Charlie did not believe that. He believed they had been attacked by native tribes in the area. But the police were not buying that. They said this was a natural thing. This was an accident. And so that was that. When the story of these two decapitated men made the news, people went crazy about this. People were very divided about what they thought really happened. There was a percentage of people that believed that partial skeleton that was found was not Robert Weir. They believed he had not died, but that he had murdered the two brothers, decapitated them, and then made off with their gold. The other percentage of people believed that all three men, the two brothers and Robert, had been attacked by a person, a group of people, an animal, a creature, something. They believed there was some sort of attack. And that is why the two brothers were in those positions that indicated they had encountered something horrifying, with one brother reaching for the gun and the other appearing to have leapt from his bed before he ultimately died. But regardless of which side you fell on, pretty much everybody at the time who heard about the story became terrified of the Nahanni Valley, and specifically, they became terrified of that stretch in Second Canyon where the two brothers had been found. And so actually, that stretch got renamed the Headless Valley. And from that point forward, that is all it was known as. And so even though there were obvious gold prospects in the Headless Valley and all along the South Nahanni River and the Flat River, people after this story broke were just not prepared to risk going in there and potentially becoming another victim. And so people kind of stayed away from Nahanni Valley. 8 years later, though, in 1913, a gold prospector named Martin Jorgensen decided, you know what, I am not going to let some scary stories about some headless men and ghosts and killers on the loose get in the way of me taking gold out of Nahanni Valley. So, all on his own, Martin makes the arduous trek inside of Nahanni Valley. He makes his way up Flat River, and he finally finds a spot about 70 miles upstream of where Headless Valley was. And he actually built a one-room cabin because he was going to stay there through the winter. And then the plan was he would meet up with his partners the following summer. And so right after he got there, he set up his sluices and he started mining for gold. And apparently he found a lot of it because he sent word back to his partners outside of the valley that he had made it rich. And so his partners were really excited to meet up with him the following summer and see how much he got because they planned on going back into the valley with him that summer. So that summer rolls around, his partners go to the meeting spot right outside the valley. But Martin does not show up. And so his partners stay outside at this meeting space for several days until finally, when he does not show up, they decide they have to go in there and see if he is okay because at this point he should have been there. There was no excuse. And so they end up going into the Nahanni Valley. They make their way up Flat River and they go roughly to the area where they knew he was staying based on the message he had sent earlier. He had described where he was staying and they actually found his cabin, or I should say they found what was left of his cabin. His cabin had been completely torched, burned to the ground, and laying on the ground next to the burned out cabin was the burned out remains of another headless corpse. And this corpse belonged to Martin Jorgensen. The police did a thorough investigation, but they were never able to determine what actually killed him. The police did not connect Martin's death with the two McLeod brothers' deaths. Even though they were all decapitated, they were in roughly the same area, and it happened within a few years of each other, and they looked very, very similar. Even though that all was true, the police said, nope, these are totally separate. Martin died for some reason, and then animals took parts of him away, and that is why his skull is missing. Martin's skull was never located, and the gold that Martin claimed to have struck it rich with was also not at the cabin, not on him. There was no gold anywhere in the vicinity. When Martin's death made the news, people went crazy. And despite the police assuring everyone that his death was not connected to the McLeod brothers' deaths, even though the police were saying that, the public did not see it that way. It was just too easy to connect one decapitation with two other decapitations that had happened close together in a relatively short time frame. And so a lot of people assumed there must be a killer on the loose somewhere in Nahanni Valley. 7 years later, in 1921, the rumors of a killer on the loose were still alive and well when gold prospector John O'Brien and his partner decided, you know what, despite the rumors of the so-called killer or whatever is going on in the Nahanni Valley, let us go into the Nahanni Valley and try our hand. Let us try to get some gold. And so the two of them made their way into the valley and they set up camp in Headless Valley, not far from where the McLeod brothers had been found decapitated. So they set up their camp and they are there for a couple of days. They are doing well, they are finding gold, and then at some point, John tells his partner that he is going to go out and check all of their traps along the river, and he will be back in about 8 or 9 days. And so his partner waits 8 or 9 days and John does not come back. And a couple of days after that goes by and now John is past due, and so the partner decides he has to go out looking for him. And so there was another gold prospector in the area. And so this partner contacted him and the two of them went to the river and began walking upstream until they found John. And he had frozen to death, but it was very interesting the way he was positioned. He was sitting in front of this, obviously previously lit campfire. He was not hunched over, he did not look like he was in pain. He looked like he was just enjoying the fire. There was nothing on his face that indicated discomfort or pain or fear. He was even holding the matchbook in his hand. It was like he was just sitting there enjoying the fire when something caused him to suddenly freeze. In fact, witnesses would say John looked like he had been flash frozen, as if it had happened in a matter of seconds, because it did not look like he had reacted properly to freezing to death. And the police, when they came out, they would say, this is odd. This is odd the way he is positioned. But ultimately, he died because he froze to death. And so there was no foul play here, and so no further investigation is needed. 5 years later, in 1926, a hunting party that included a young woman named Annie Lafferty was camping out along the flat river inside of Headless Valley. And so that night, they are all kind of joking around the fire. And then at some point, they decide to all go to sleep. And then the next day, when everybody gets up, Annie is no longer in camp. And there is no sign of where she went. And so they begin by yelling out and walking around the immediate vicinity to see maybe if she stepped away for a minute, but Annie is just gone and no one knows where she went. And so the hunting party spends the rest of the day looking for Annie, but there is no sign of her. They ultimately leave the valley. They tell the police. The police come out. There is this huge search, but Annie is never found. Several months later, a man named Charlie, who happened to have been out near Flat River near this hunting party when they were out there, but Charlie himself was not in the hunting party. He did not know Annie. He was just in the vicinity, overheard someone talking about a member of that hunting party, specifically a woman, going missing. And when he heard that, he knew he had to tell the police what he had seen that night out near Flat River. So he goes to the police and he explains that that night when he knew there was this hunting party over there, he could hear them. He knew they were over there. He said at some point he went to bed and then he woke up when he heard the sound of rocks falling into the river in front of him. He was sleeping along the river's edge. So he sits up and he looks out across the river. It is totally dark, but there is some moonlight and he is kind of looking around, wondering what is causing the sound, but he cannot see it. And then he hears it again and he can tell it is off to his left. And these are not huge rocks. These are like medium to small sized rocks, like rocks you could just pick up and throw. And so he is looking and all of a sudden he sees, maybe a couple hundred yards away through some sparse trees, a white naked woman running on all fours up this mountainside. And as she is running up the mountainside, her feet and her hands are knocking little rocks into the river down below. She is right on the edge of this cliff, and as she is running up this hill, she stops and she turns and he gets a good look at her face. And Charlie would say he was so taken aback by her face. It looked like she was possessed. There was something wrong with her face. And so Charlie instinctively ducked down and chose not to follow her, even though he knew anybody running naked anywhere in the wilds is doomed. But he felt like he could not go near this woman. He felt like there was something wrong with this woman. And so the police take the story down and they ask him if this is what Annie looked like. And Charlie would say, I think that is her. I think that matches her description. And so universally, it is believed this woman galloping up this hillside in the middle of the night naked was Annie. The police ultimately would not investigate Annie's disappearance any further because at the time Charlie was telling them this piece of information, she had already been gone for months, and the assumption was she was dead. 4 years later, in 1931, another gold prospector decides to try their luck in Headless Valley. A man named Phil Powers. He makes his way into the valley. He finds a spot off of Flat River. He builds a cabin, and then shortly thereafter, his cabin burns to the ground with him inside of it. Now, his skeleton was intact, but the strange thing about his death is based on the origin of the fire, which would have been on the roof. He should have had an opportunity to climb out of the cabin before it burned down, giving rise to the theory that he was actually dead before the fire started. However, the police said this was an accident caused by Phil doing something with the stovepipe that led to it catching on fire, and this was just all one big accident. But the vast majority of people that had followed along to this point with all of these strange deaths, they were just not buying it. 5 years later, in 1936, two more gold prospectors, William Epper and Joseph Mulholland, entered the Headless Valley to try their luck. And shortly after arriving and getting set up, they went missing. A search party came out to look for them and they found their cabin. And just like Phil Powers, it had burned to the ground. But William and Joseph were not in the ashes. They were not anywhere nearby. In fact, they were never found. No one has any idea what happened to them, and no one knows what caused the fire. 9 years later, in 1945, yet another gold prospector named Ernest Savard entered the Headless Valley to go looking for gold. And then when he did not leave the valley for an intended rendezvous with some of his partners went looking for him. And they would find him inside of a sleeping bag, laying down, decapitated, right along the Flat River inside of the Headless Valley. And so the police would come out, they would do an investigation, and they would call this an accident where, he starved to death or he died of hypothermia, and then after he was dead, animals must have come in and removed his skull, and that is why they could not find it. And so the police did not, at least not publicly, connect his death to all of the other decapitations in that small area. 1 year later, in 1946, another gold miner named John Patterson went into Headless Valley, and he went missing. And so a search party went in looking for him, and John would never be found. But on one of the last nights that the search party was in the Headless Valley, they were camping out near Flat River. Some native tribespeople came into their camp and they warned them about some white figures that were walking around the valley that night. They told them that they are down near the river, they are out in the forest, and they are kind of all around here, so they really needed to be careful because they did not want those things to see them. And then these tribespeople just left. And so this search party is absolutely horrified. They know about the rumors of this place, they are out here looking for someone that has gone missing in this place. And all night all they hear are distant howls and screams that they had not heard in the previous nights. They are hearing these wailing sounds coming from all around them, like these things that are out there were intentionally trying to scare them to get them to leave. It felt like they were not supposed to be there. The next day, first thing when they got up and they left, the leader of that search party would say he just felt like the whole valley was totally sinister, and that constant wailing they heard the night before, he said he will never forget. From the mid-1940s onward, there have been far less strange incidents reported inside of Nahanni Valley. But one could attribute that to the fact that far less people have been going into Nahanni Valley ever since the 1940s. And in recent times, huge segments of the park have been permanently closed. The park has said the reason they are doing that is to protect that segment of the park. But other people have speculated that at least part of the reason why they are closing these segments, many of which are right near the Headless Valley, is because they are trying to protect people from getting anywhere near whatever it is that is lurking inside of that park. But regardless, it is still a fact that over the last century there have been dozens and dozens of people that have either gone missing or who have died under very mysterious circumstances inside of this valley. And the truth is, nobody knows why. In 2016, a 25-year-old Wall Street banker named Matt was camping near Mount Rainier in Washington state. His job was so hectic that in the rare times he got a chance to, he would disappear into the wilderness for a few days to clear his head. Despite living in one of the biggest cities in the world, Matt was actually a very competent outdoorsman. And so for this trip, he decided he would stay way off any trail, deep in the backcountry, in random locations. On the first night, he found a nice clearing in the trees, and so he set up his campsite there. He ate some food over his fire. He pitched his tent, climbed inside, and within a few minutes, he was fast asleep. Several hours later, Matt woke up to some strange sounds coming from outside of his tent. It sounded like a couple of animals, or maybe one animal moving around right outside, and so, after a while of just hearing this constant sound, he rolled over and he barely unzipped his tent flap just to look out and see if he could see whatever animal it was. And what he saw shocked him. There was a man sitting in front of his fire pit. There was no fire in his fire pit. And the guy was just sitting there with his hands on his knees, looking straight down, and periodically he would just kick his feet in the ashes of the fire pit. And Matt did not even know what to do. So, he is just looking at him through this little tiny gap in his tent. And this man all of a sudden looks up directly at Matt and makes eye contact with him. And the guy's eyes go wide and he stands up, turns around, and runs away from Matt's campsite. Matt has no idea how to react to this. And so he just quickly unzips his tent, jumps outside, and shines his light into the forest looking for this guy. He is thinking to himself, who is this guy? I am in the middle of nowhere in the backcountry of Washington state. How long was he sitting outside there for, and what does he want? And so as Matt is trying to make sense of this totally weird thing, he is thinking, okay, I am going to look out and I am going to see his flashlight somewhere, or I am going to see his campsite. Maybe he is set up nearby, and he is looking around into the total darkness. He is looking through all the trees. Any light source anywhere out there he would see. And there is not one, there is no fire, there is no flashlight, there is nothing. And so eventually Matt goes back inside of his tent. He zips it up and he is just left kind of dumbfounded. He cannot understand how some person was just sitting outside of his tent for no apparent reason and then vanished into the forest without even turning on a flashlight. And so, after a very restless night, finally the sun came up again and Matt was very relieved. He stepped outside and after a little bit of time now from this strange incident, Matt started to tell himself that all that was is some guy happened to set up his campsite nearby. It is possible, albeit rare because we are in the back country, and maybe he was just intoxicated and he wandered over here and, stranger things have happened. So that is probably all it was. And so Matt felt like there was nothing to worry about. He packed up his campsite and he began hiking into the forest. Matt did not have a planned route. Instead, he had a map and a compass, and he began just kind of wandering in the forest, kind of exploring wherever he wanted to go. And over the next 2 days, he covered at least 10, maybe 15 miles in kind of random zigzag directions. He found a nice clearing, and he set up another campsite. That night, he set up a fire, and he was eating some food near his fire. And then as he is sitting there, he hears rustling coming from behind him, and he is pretty sure it is an animal. So he turns around, and he does not see anything, and he goes back to eating his food. And then a little while later, he hears some more rustling behind him. And this time, he cannot really just write it off. Clearly there is something behind him that is moving around, and so he stood up, turned around, and remained motionless and just listened, expecting to see maybe a deer come out of the woods. But instead, he hears a man's voice come out of the darkness that says, "Do you know how to get to Bell's Canyon?" And Matt's heart starts racing. He knows that even though he cannot see him, it has to be the same guy he saw 2 days ago because they are in the middle of nowhere. He has not seen any other hikers or campers or anyone, and clearly this guy has the ability to sneak up on him. And so he is thinking, what does this guy want? I just spent the past 2 days hiking in random directions for 15 miles, and he must have followed me. And so Matt, not knowing what else to do, just says, "I do not know where Bell's Canyon is." And then there is silence. And Matt, one part of him is thinking, I hope this guy does not come into the light. I hope he just goes away. The other part of him is thinking, well, maybe this is a different person that is lost, and they are looking for this place called Bell's Canyon, and they will come into the light. It will be a big relief. I will send them on their merry way, and everything will be fine. But as Matt is having this wishful thinking, the voice from the shadows does not come any closer, but instead asks the same question a bit more forcefully this time. "Do you know how to get to Bell's Canyon?" This time, Matt did not respond. Now, he was scared. This is not some friendly hiker looking for directions. There is something wrong. And so, Matt, knowing he is all alone out here, he knew he had to do something to try to take control of this situation. And so, he took a deep breath. He reached down and grabbed his flashlight, and in one swift motion, he lifted his light up and shined it in the direction of this guy's voice. And what he saw was this guy from 2 days ago looking out from behind a tree right in Matt's direction. He was hiding from him. And when the light hit him, the man barked at Matt to aim it away, and Matt kind of instinctively lowered his light, but now he was too scared to raise it again, and now he knows it is the same guy. This guy has been following me for 2 days, and so for several minutes, Matt just stood there absolutely terrified. And this guy, he just stayed out there. Matt did not hear him move. It was just a complete standstill. And then the silence was broken yet again by this voice. Except somehow he had moved even closer to Matt. And when he came through asking the same question, "Do you know how to get to Bell's Canyon?" His voice was so close to Matt that Matt got scared and raised his light up. And the man was standing just a few feet away from him. And this time, the man's eyes got wide like they did the first time they saw Matt, and he turned around and he ran into the forest again. Matt, not knowing any better, just began running after him. But he only ran for about 30 seconds before he realized the terrain out here is so rough, he is going to fall, get hurt, he is going to get lost, and this guy is already long gone. He has somehow managed to run immediately so far away. And so Matt just goes back to his campsite, and he is thinking to himself, what do? I have no cell phone service, I am at least 3 days away from my car, and I am in the middle of nowhere. No one even knows where I am because I did not chart a course, I did not tell anyone where I was going to be. And so Matt just grabbed his knife and stood in the middle of the campsite. And for hours and hours, he just kept looking around expecting this guy to just show up again or start speaking to him from somewhere out in the darkness. It was absolutely stressful. Finally, by about 3 o'clock in the morning, Matt was so tired that he had to go to sleep. He had not heard this guy again. He did not see him again, and he figured, I need a little bit of sleep because tomorrow he is going to pack up his campsite and begin this epic journey back to his car. And so he climbed in his tent and he had a very restless next couple of hours. And the sun came up, Matt jumped out of his tent, packed up his stuff, and began practically running in the direction of his car. All day as he was hiking, Matt kept looking over his shoulder, expecting to see this guy because clearly he had followed him for multiple days over 15 miles. And so the likelihood that he is still following him was really high. And so all day Matt just felt like he was being watched. He was totally scared. And then the sun started to go down and Matt knew he would have to camp out again. And so he found a clearing in the trees. He set up his campsite, and he was so tired from running basically all day and being so mentally exhausted from this experience that he just got in his tent and fell asleep very quickly. But several hours later, he woke up to the sound of somebody walking around his tent. And he knew it had to be this guy. He is still in the middle of nowhere. He is not even close to the parking lot yet. And so this guy is still following him. And so Matt sat up in his tent. He clutched his knife. And for hours and hours, all night, this guy just walked around his campsite. And then around 4 or 5 in the morning, he scampered off. When the sun finally came up, Matt leapt out of his tent, packed up his stuff, and literally just began running in the direction of his car, hoping that maybe he could get there before needing to camp out one more night. And so all day as he moved, he is looking over his shoulder, knowing this guy is following him. At this point, it is not even a question. He is somewhere in the forest, but he could never see him. And unfortunately, as the sun was setting, he knew he was not going to be able to make it to his car. He was just too far away. And so at some point when it got too dark to keep moving, he had to find a clearing and set up his tent again. And so once his tent was set up, he just climbed inside, grabbed his knife, and sat there knowing this guy was somewhere out there. And so Matt climbed inside of his tent. He zipped it up behind him. He grabbed his knife and he sat there expecting to hear this guy come walking around, but after several hours he did not hear him. And Matt started to wonder, maybe this guy has left me alone finally, maybe he is not following me anymore. And so Matt, who was totally exhausted, laid down to go to sleep. And then as he is laying there, from somewhere out in the woods, a voice asked, "Do you know how to get to Bell's Canyon?" Matt immediately sat up. His heart began racing so fast that he actually was concerned he might have a medical issue, and he did not know what to do. He did not know what to say. So he just sat there holding his knife, and then this guy began running past his campsite, making animal sounds. He would stop periodically and moan and grunt, and he would pick up leaves, and then he would run past his campsite again, over and over and over again, until the sun finally came up, and this guy scampered off back into the woods. Matt did not waste any time. He leapt out of his tent, packed his stuff up, and ran all the way back to his car. When he finally got inside of his car, shut the door, and locked it, he cried tears of joy. He was so unbelievably relieved, and he peeled out of the parking lot. He got to a nearby hotel, he finally got cell phone reception, and he considered calling the police about this guy, but he thought, what am I going to tell them? He did not commit a crime. He was just bizarre. And so he decided not to call the police. He finally flew back to New York, and he just had to accept that there was some strange guy out in the wilderness of Washington State who was able to hunt him over 3 days and 30 miles in rugged terrain without the use of a flashlight, without any gear. And all he ever said to Matt was, "Do you know how to get to Bell's Canyon?" Around midnight on September 3rd, 1986, Doug Wells and his wife Kristen were pulling onto their street in western Montana when they noticed a camper parked in front of their house. Neither of them recognized the camper, and so when they pulled into their driveway, Doug got out and walked over and looked inside to see if anyone was in there. And there was. There was a man sleeping in the front seat. Doug did not wake him up. Instead, he went back to his wife. They talked about it. And they decided that this man must have just randomly parked in front of their house and that most likely the next day he would leave. And so the couple went inside their house and they began getting ready for bed. At some point, Doug rounded up all the trash inside of the house and was going to bring it outside to put into the trash bin. And when he went outside, standing in his front lawn is the same guy who was just sleeping inside of the camper. And so Doug very cautiously goes down the front steps and he yells out to this guy and says, "What are you doing here?" And immediately the man put his hands up and said he meant no harm. He said his name was Wayne Nance and he actually worked with Doug's wife, Kristen, at the furniture store in town. Wayne went on to say that he happened to be driving down their street earlier that day and he spotted someone standing outside one of their windows, looking in their house, and he knew it was Kristen's house, and he looked in their driveway and he saw that Kristen was not home, and it looked like nobody was home, and so he decided he would just park out front and try to scare off this person and wait for Kristen to get back. But by the time Kristen got back, he had fallen asleep. Doug was totally caught off guard by this whole situation. The idea that there is this guy on his property talking about another guy that was lurking around his property. And so he asked Wayne, "Did you see this guy again after that first time you saw him?" And Wayne said no, he had not, but he did not have a flashlight. And so maybe if Doug went in the house and got some flashlights, the two of them could walk the property and make sure nobody was there. Doug thanked him for the offer and said, "Okay, well, why don't you come in the house and I will go look for those flashlights." And so Doug led the way inside of his house. And as soon as Wayne got in the house and shut the front door behind him, he pulled out a metal pipe he was hiding and smashed Doug over the back of the head. Doug turned around and Wayne hit him again over the face, and before long, the two of them were struggling on the ground. Kristen, who was upstairs, heard the commotion and she came running down the stairs, and she sees at the bottom her husband who is bleeding profusely from his head. He is covering himself up on the ground while Wayne, her coworker, is standing over him, punching and kicking him. Before Kristen could do anything, Wayne noticed her up on the stairs, and he drew a pistol and aimed it at her and told her to come down here and tie up your husband's arms and legs. Kristen, who is in shock, is just hoping this was just a robbery and that they would have their lives spared. And so she does as she is told. She walks down, Wayne throws her some cord, she ties up her husband's arms and legs, and then afterwards, Wayne leads Kristen back upstairs to the bedroom where he ties her up as well. After that, Wayne went back down to the main floor where Doug was still laying on the ground. And he grabbed Doug by the legs and he pulled him down the flight of stairs to the basement where he tied him up to a pole. And then he beat him with a pipe before Wayne pulled out an 8-inch blade and plunged it directly into Doug's chest, all the way in. And then when he pulled it out again, Doug slumped over. Wayne went back upstairs all the way to the second floor to check on Kristen, and he saw she had managed to get partially out of her restraints, and she was reaching for the landline, and so he jumped on top of her and managed to restrain her all over again. And then after he was confident in her restraints, he went back downstairs to make sure Doug was dead. When he got down there, he saw Doug was still slouched over in the same position he had left him, and so Wayne assumed Doug must be dead. And Wayne went back upstairs to assault Kristen. But Wayne was wrong. Doug was not dead. And after Wayne went upstairs that second time, Doug, despite his head and chest injuries, managed to wriggle out of his restraints and then hobbled over to a workbench where he had a rifle laying out because Doug was actually a gunsmith. And so he took the rifle and he loaded it with the one round he found on the table, and then he walked over to the base of the stairs. He raised his rifle and he made his way up to the main floor. He did not come in contact with Wayne, and he looked around the first floor. He did not see him, and he heard his wife screaming upstairs, and so he made his way to the next set of stairs and began walking up with his rifle raised. At the top of the stairs to the second floor, there was a hallway that ran right and left out of sight. And so as Doug is making his way up, he can hear off to the left out of view his wife screaming in the bedroom. And he can hear the sound of very heavy footsteps running down the hall towards the landing where he is. And so Doug positioned himself in the stairwell. He took aim about chest height with his rifle, and he waited for their attacker to show himself. And so as soon as Wayne came flying around the corner with his knife in his hand, Doug just fired one shot that struck him right in the stomach. Wayne fell backwards, totally shocked at what had just happened. He began to stagger, and Doug, meanwhile, turned his rifle around like a baseball bat because he did not have any more rounds. And he just starts walking down the hall, smashing Wayne as Wayne continues to stumble and fall and try to run away from Doug. And finally, he gets away from Doug, charges into the bedroom where Kristen is, and he grabs his pistol, and he turns around and he fires 3 shots towards the door where Doug is now standing. And Doug is unfazed. One round hits him in the leg, the other 2 miss. He does not care. He just walks up to Wayne and begins bashing his head in with the back of this rifle. He hits him so many times that the buttstock of the rifle explodes and the metal of the rifle bends like an L, and at some point, Wayne drops the gun because he is getting beaten on by Doug and his rifle, and Doug sees that. He grabs the pistol and he fires the remaining rounds into Wayne's head. Police and paramedics would show up shortly thereafter, and Doug, Kristen, and their attacker Wayne were all rushed to the hospital. Doug and Kristen would make full recoveries. As for Wayne, he would die the following day from his injuries. After the incident, the police investigated Wayne Nance to see who this guy was. And they discovered that almost certainly he had been a serial killer that was connected to at least 6 cold case murders from 1974 to 1986. But because Wayne never confessed to any of these murders before he died, the true number of people he killed is still unknown. In 2010, Kayla was a senior at the University of California, Santa Barbara, a big party school, and one Friday evening, Kayla and her friends were at a big party. And Kayla was having a great time, but she was starting to feel really tired. And so she asked her friends if maybe they wanted to leave early, but none of them did. And so Kayla left on her own. Luckily, her house was just down the road, and so she was at her front door in a matter of minutes. That night, her 2 roommates, who were also college seniors, had decided to stay in and just have a nice night with a couple of friends having some wine. And so when Kayla walked inside, she happened to turn to the right and she looked on the closest wall where there was a sofa, and she saw there was a guy laying there with a blanket up to his chin and his eyes were wide open. She did not recognize him, but he was staring at her and she figured, oh, he must be a friend of her roommates. But as she walked across the room, she kind of glanced back at him, and he had pulled the covers down slightly, and he had lifted his head up, and he was staring at her kind of menacingly. And so Kayla got a really bad vibe from this guy and just kind of hustled into her room, shut the door behind her and locked it, something she never did. And a few minutes later, she was in her bed and she was passed out. A couple of hours later, she woke up to what sounded like tapping on wood. And so she sat up in her bed and she is kind of looking around. She had a couple of drinks the night before, and she is half asleep, so she is a bit disoriented. But finally, when she gets her bearings, she realizes this tapping sound is the sound of someone drumming their fingers on the outside of her door. And so she is looking at her door, wondering who would be doing that. And then all of a sudden, the drumming stops, and it is replaced by the sound of this person scratching on the outside of the door. And so now Kayla is thinking, okay, is this guy who was out on that couch, is he playing a joke on me? And so she is sitting there wondering if she should just go over there and open the door and tell him to stop. But before she gets out of her bed, the scratching gets louder and louder and louder until it is so loud that it is kind of scary. And so Kayla decides she is not going to go out there. And so instead, she pulls out her phone and she texts her roommate and says, hey, can you please come out in the living room and take care of your friend who is harassing me? But she does not get a response from that roommate, and the scratching is just still as loud as ever. And so she texts her other roommate the same message, telling her to come out and take care of her buddy, but again, she does not get a response. And now the scratching on the door has stopped and it has been replaced by the jiggling of her doorknob. And so now Kayla is just mad because this is obviously a prank and it is a dumb prank. And so she yells out, hey, stop, but it does not do anything. And so now Kayla is like, okay, I have got to call my roommates, wake them up, they will come out and they will handle it. And so she calls one of her roommates, and they do pick up this time. And Kayla angrily tells them, hey, come out into the living room and tell your friend to knock it off. He is totally harassing me. and her roommate was confused. She is trying to make sense of what Kayla is saying, and she says, "Kayla, what are you talking about? What friend are you talking about?" And Kayla says, "The guy sleeping on the couch, the guy in our living room sleeping on the couch." And her roommate said, "Kayla, we did not have anybody over last night. Is somebody out there? You need to call the police." Kayla's adrenaline surged, and she very calmly told her roommate, "Lock your door immediately." And right then, she noticed the jiggling of her doorknob and the scratching, and it all stopped. And Kayla is wondering, where did this guy go? And then after a couple of seconds, she heard extremely loud banging coming from across the house where her two roommates shared a room. And it was the sound of this guy trying to smash down their door, and so Kayla is screaming, her roommates are screaming. Kayla manages to dial up 911, and before long, there are sirens outside. And Kayla hears the sound of this guy run across the house, and she hears the sliding door open and shut. The police come inside. They search the property, and there is no sign of this guy, and so Kayla and the roommates come outside. They talk to the police, and the police bring them over to their side door, and they show them on the outside there was all sorts of scratch marks all over the doorknob and right around the latch, and they said it looks like he was able to jimmy his way into your house through this door. And so then they asked the girls to give their statement about what happened, and they started with Kayla. They went over to her bedroom door so she could demonstrate what happened. And that is when they noticed there were all these scratch marks and gouge marks all over the outside of her bedroom door and all over the doorknob and all over the latch. And on the ground was a pair of scissors and a knife. And the police told Kayla that it looks like he used those scissors and that knife to open up the side door. And he was trying to use those tools again to open up her door, but for whatever reason, he just could not do it. They told Kayla that most likely when she went in the front door, she caught this guy off guard. Maybe he was trying to rob the place. Maybe he had just broken in. But either way, Kayla got in and ruined his plans. And so he leapt onto that sofa, the one against that inner wall, to kind of tuck himself away in hopes that maybe Kayla would not look over and see him. And they told her that most likely when she made eye contact with him, she became a witness and therefore a target of opportunity. And had she not locked her door, who knows what would have happened. The SS Andrea Doria, which was a beautiful ocean liner, was considered to be Italy's largest, fastest, and safest ship. But those things would not be what this ship was remembered for. On July 25th of 1956, the ship was sailing towards the east coast of the United States when it ran into some very heavy fog. And so, following procedure, the captain slowed the vessel down and turned on their fog whistle. A little while later, another vessel, the Swedish ocean liner called the SS Stockholm, entered the fog as well, but they were unaware of the Andrea Doria's position. Now, both vessels were using radar, but unfortunately, both vessels misinterpreted what they were seeing, and so neither of them communicated with the other as they careened towards each other. When visual contact was finally made between the two ships, it was too late. A collision was imminent. At 11:10 p.m. that night, the bow of the Stockholm plowed directly into the side of the Andrea Doria, penetrating over 40 feet inside the ship before coming back out again. The impact killed 46 people on the Andrea Doria and 5 people on the Stockholm. When the story broke, every major news outlet around the world picked it up, including ABC News in the United States. And the news correspondent that they chose to cover this story was a man named Edward Morgan. And unbeknownst to his co-workers, his 14-year-old daughter, Linda Morgan, was on board the Andrea Doria. And just before he went on, he was informed that she was amongst the missing and presumed dead. And there was virtually nothing he could do but wait for more information. And so, despite his incredible burden, Edward still went on the air and reported the story without ever losing his composure and without ever mentioning his daughter. But after he got off the air, another story began to develop about the crash. Apparently, a girl who was asleep in one of the rooms on the Andrea Doria that experienced a direct hit from the Stockholm woke up after the crash and did not know where she was, and she began yelling out for her mother. Meanwhile, a man on board the Stockholm heard the girl's cries, and he ran towards the front of the Stockholm, which is where he heard these cries coming from. And when he got up there, he could not believe what he was seeing. Perched on the destroyed bow of the Stockholm was a bed, and on that bed was a relatively unharmed 14-year-old girl named Linda Morgan. It would turn out when the Stockholm penetrated into the Andrea Doria, the bow of the Stockholm scooped the bed Linda Morgan was on up and kind of dragged her into the ship. And then when it retracted out of the Andrea Doria, it brought that bed and Linda Morgan with it. When Edward Morgan found out that his daughter was the so-called miracle girl, he was overcome with emotions and he would go back on the air. And this time, he would talk about his daughter and her incredible survival story. And he would also talk about how hard it was to deliver the news when it was about someone he loved. Linda would make a full physical recovery. She only suffered from a broken arm, but she would suffer enormously from survivor's guilt as her stepfather and her half-sister were both killed in the crash. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya.